Yeah, well, thank you for coming out. This was a very hastily organized event. I only knew Ken was coming on Sunday. Monday morning, he wasn't coming until I told him the posters were already printed, and he said, "Well, I'm coming." So Ken came all the way from Spokane. He was speaking in Spokane last night and drove right across Washington State, got on the Port Angeles ferry, and he's here today. So he's come a long ways to speak with us. I won't have a big introduction again because I wasn't really prepared. But well, my name's Kevin Nichols. I'm sponsoring this event and with many friends from other groups here. But I was on the MV Marmara. I don't know if everybody knows that, but I was an activist on the MV Marmara, working with the Free Gaza movement. I was when the Israelis attacked the ship, which is the flotilla. I was on the inside of the ship. I was in the internal stairwell, and I acted as a human rights observer, taking photographs and whatnot of the dead and the wounded and the Israeli commandos, and making sure that the Israelis were treated properly. I followed them down the stairs. And Ken, on the other hand, was upstairs on the top deck, actually disarming the Israeli commandos, and probably saved my life because the Israelis were trying to burst in the door at the very end. So if they'd been a little faster getting onto the ship, they probably would have burst in the door and got us. But anyways, I think I'll just hand it over to Ken. You're not here to hear me. I think you're here to hear Ken. So Ken O'Keefe.
Yes. First off, I'd like to thank everybody myself for coming out. As Kevin said, it was really quite hastily set up here. And I didn't even know if I would make it in today as planned. The last time I came into Canada was last November. I thought I would make my trip a little bit easier because having renounced my U.S. citizenship, I always get problems flying into the U.S. and there's always that chance that I may be denied the ability to board the plane. So I thought, well, I'll fly into Canada and then I'll cross by land. That way I won't lose my airline ticket. Little did I know that when I flew into Canada, and this is before the Mavi Marmara incident, Canadian officials were waiting for me, took me to an interrogation room and proceeded to detain me for 2 days without charges. And in the course of that process, I answered all the questions that I've answered many times before with regards to who I've met, where I've been, and all this kind of stuff. And at the end of it, the man who originally took me in, the Canadian official, became a friend of mine, and I really felt a real kinship for the guy. And I could tell he was deeply sorry that he had to do this, put me in jail for 2 days. He knew at the end of the process that there was no good reason to do that. But I think those of us who were involved in directly confronting institutions of power know that at a certain point, if you're getting any kind of effectiveness, then these are just the least of your concerns. Traveling hassles and whatnot are pretty minor. On the Mavi Marmara, I'll get into it in a bit, but 2 days after I was released, and I literally did everything I could to stay in Israel. I wanted to face I wanted to get in front of a judge and get it on record. 2 days after I was released, the IDF issued a press release stating that there were 5 terrorists on board, and I was named as one of the terrorists. They said I was, quote, a terrorist operative, and that I was, quote, traveling to Gaza to train a commando unit for Hamas. Now this is quite interesting news to me, I must say, because although I may have achieved a thing or two on the Mavi Marmara that night, if anybody needs some training to be a commando, it's me, not any of the Hamas people. They have plenty of skills themselves. Anyway, I think what I'd like to do is just say a little bit about my background and how I see myself having gotten to this point. I grew up in America, Southern California. My mom is here, by the way. Any good thing that I've done, I will have to directly attribute to her. And I grew up with a blessed life. My passion was going to the beach on the weekends and eventually ditching school and going to the beach on weekdays as well. And surfing and boogie boarding and all that stuff was my first love, really. I played soccer, football, and I had a blessed life, middle-class suburbia. I grew up with the same ideas that every American grows up with. My nation is the greatest in the world, freedom and democracy, all that kind of stuff. And it was in that context that I joined the Marine Corps at the age of 19. And then while I was in the Marine Corps, I was still largely ignorant and brainwashed. But what happened to me there was I took certain elements of the Marine Corps very seriously. One was leadership by example. I also believed in the U.S. Constitution. I knew a little bit about it. And I also believed in honor and integrity. And I thought those things were inherent in the Marine Corps. About a year into my Marine Corps experience, I was a model Marine. I was given a high position of rank for my time in service. We went out at sea, and I saw my superiors violating their position of power. And I ended up reporting them for doing what they did. Now, in the Marine Corps, especially in the infantry, this is a cardinal sin. Jumping your chain of command that's just not the kind of thing you do unless you want a problem. And it is exactly what I did, because I knew if I went to them, they'd say, piss off. You know, they were the ones that were doing it. So for me to go to them wouldn't have gone anywhere. So I jumped my chain of command and I reported them for what they were doing. And I felt in line with honor and integrity, I would have to do it openly. So I did. I acknowledged that I was the one that did it. What happened was I went from being a model Marine to being the, quote, biggest piece of shit in 17 years in the Marine Corps that my platoon sergeant had in service, and my life became very, very difficult. If you've ever seen the movie Full Metal Jacket, then you may recall the first half of that movie is nothing more than boot camp, and the drill instructor, the man who plays the drill instructor, is in fact a Marine Corps drill instructor from Vietnam, so it's played very accurately. Throughout that first half of the movie, Private Pyle is one of the central figures. Private Pyle screws up everywhere, and the drill instructor punishes him over and over and over again. But eventually, he abandons that tactic and uses another tactic, which is to punish the entire platoon. But they all know they're getting punished because of Private Pyle. And that was what happened to me as well. My platoon was getting punished. They knew it was because of me. And that was where I had to look over my shoulder continuously, and life became extremely difficult. And we were at sea as well, so I was always having to be careful about ending up overboard at any point. When you're dealing with a platoon of angry Marines, you know, you've got to really look after yourself. The thing the effect that had on me, however, was that was my first taste of injustice. And it was the greatest blessing of my life. Previous to that, I had a charmed existence. Like so many of us in white Western society, we're pretty comfortable, I think. And in fact, that's maybe one of our biggest problems. We're a bit too comfortable. And that discomfort of the injustice of experiencing this, doing the right thing and yet getting punished, it really pissed me off. And it also made me realize that I had joined the Marine Corps under false pretenses. I thought this was about honor and integrity and leadership by example, and it wasn't. So it also set the stage for me to question, well, what else am I wrong about? And so I endured my 3 years in the Marine Corps. It was the happiest day of my life getting out. I vowed I would never give up my freedom again, and that I would exercise my freedom to the hilt. But I was still largely stupid, quite frankly. After I got out of the Marine Corps, though, I started an independent course of study, and I started to read sources of information that, of course, were never provided in public schools or even universities, for that matter. Books that I read that changed my life, Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, absolutely brilliant book that just shows the shameful treatment of the Native Americans by the American government over and over and over again. Malcolm X, the autobiography of Malcolm X, had a profound impact on me. I realized that when I was younger, I had developed prejudices towards black people because they bused the rich white kids to the poor black neighborhood once a week for integration. And being the rambunctious kid that I was, I ended up getting into fights with one black kid, but always it ended up being with more than one. As a result of that, I started to get some real prejudices towards black people, even though one of my friends who was raised in the white neighborhood, who was black, was a good friend of mine. I started to develop prejudices towards other black people. And what was happening there was I was seeing the result. Obviously, the result was the anger that exists in the black community that's passed down generation to generation. It's obviously a legacy of the enslavement of black Americans and the racism that persists to this day. All I saw, however, was the result, and it made me angry. When I read the autobiography of Malcolm X, I realized, my God, if I had been born black in this country, without a whole lot of love and a whole lot of support, I knew I would be a statistic. I'd be in prison, I'd be a dangerous person, and you probably wouldn't want to know me. And I realized again how wrong I'd been, that I would have been one of those black kids. I would have been one of those black kids kicking that white kid's butt if it were the other way around. I read Howard Zinn's A People's History of the United States. You know, you could go to school for years and years, even universities for years and years, and come out a complete idiot. You could read that one book and learn more about American history than the volumes and volumes of crap that's put out there by so-called educated people. So along the way, I started to understand I have been lied to my entire life, and it made me angry. You know, I joined the Marine Corps believing this stuff, putting myself in a position to kill or be killed, and I was an idiot. And, you know, this is also a blessing for me because when I look at people who are heavily indoctrinated, and the Israelis are heavily indoctrinated people, the Americans are very indoctrinated, and there are plenty of indoctrinated people in Canada and Europe and other places as well. But when I see a person who is incapable of thinking for themselves, thinking that they're thinking, but simply regurgitating the crap that they're being fed, I see myself. I can see myself. So I'm not looking down on anyone when people are spouting this kind of stuff. And it also gives me hope because if I was so clueless and so stupid, well, then anyone else could possibly come out of that pit and start to use this brain for themselves. So this was my evolution, and eventually I started to get a lot of these tattoos. For me, these tattoos are a form of expression. All of them have a general theme. The World Citizen one on my hands really is kind of the ultimate belief that I have adopted, which is we're all brothers and sisters in one human family. This whole idea of giving your allegiance to a nation, to me, is nonsense. It's no different from a racist who gives allegiance to his own race, or a sexist who gives allegiance to his own gender, and a patriot, a so-called patriot who gives allegiance simply to the body of people who comprise the citizenship of their nation. To me, these are very confining, very exclusive, and it hits at the heart of what's wrong in our world. Every single person, including the Israelis, are my brothers and sisters in this human family. Despite the fact that they are my enemy and a threat to me and everyone else, they're still my brothers and sisters. These tattoos changed my life also. I knew that it would force me to walk my own path, and indeed it did. I became a dive instructor in my mid-20s, and I went to get a job as a dive instructor in Hawaii, and nobody would hire me. Before the tattoos, virtually every job I ever applied for, I got. But I couldn't get a job anymore, and I knew damn well it was because of the tattoos. It ended up forcing me to create my own company. That company still exists to this day. My mother is running that company 14 years later, and it's a fantastic company. The history, I could sit and talk about that for an hour easily. It's an amazing company. It's done some incredible things for the environment and for the community that it's based in. But I started to really get committed into direct action. I realized that if you want to get things done, waiting for governments to do things, or even waiting for organizations or charities to do things, why would you wait for someone else to do what you can do yourself? And I started to look at examples of people who conducted direct action. One of my early mentors was a man named Paul Watson. Quite a few people might know him up in this area. Not long ago, the Makah Indian Reservation, there was a whale that was going to be killed by the Makah Indians, supposedly for cultural reasons. I know the people of Victoria, Prince of Wales, a company out here, they were one of the companies that were out there, and no American companies were out there. But anyway, we were opposing the killing of that whale because it was going to be used as a precedent to make the argument for Japan that they could also do whaling based on cultural reasons. And Paul Watson is an amazing man who has committed himself to direct action. He's one of the founding fathers of Greenpeace. None of the founding fathers are with Greenpeace anymore, and they all consider themselves sort of the Dr. Frankensteins of the environmental movement. But if you look at what Paul has done, it's amazing. Nobody has protected more marine life than Paul, and it is through direct action. There's the problem. You may not be able to stop it, but you can confront it, and you can expose it, and if you keep going, eventually you're going to solve that problem, or at least you're going to curtail it. And I believe in that wholeheartedly. I've applied that belief for many years now. Eventually, my marine conservation activities made me come to the conclusion that while I was living in Hawaii, I was still no better than any other white person who came to someone else's land doing what they thought was right with no regard at all for the history nor the culture of the Hawaiian people. And I could speak easily for an hour or two on that subject as well. I produced a film called The United States of Hypocrisy. It's online, it's an hour and 45 minutes, and it will tell you a lot about Hawaii. In that process of getting involved in the Hawaiian independence movement, I earned the respect of the Hawaiian people. I became a Hawaiian national, and it really got me into human rights and international law. And that is kind of the stage that was set for me to eventually leave the United States. I formally renounced my U.S. citizenship in March of 2001, and my reason for that was that I took the time to look at what is a citizen, and I realized that it was a social contract. Now again, trying to be as honorable as I could be, I realized that under this contract, I wasn't willing to fulfill the obligations, because there are rights and there are obligations. And among the obligations, of course, is to pay into a tax system that's being used to commit mass murder and crimes against humanity. And I think 1 penny is too much, much less the amount of money that's going in to kill my brothers and sisters halfway around the world based on lies. So that was alone enough reason for me, but there were many others. And so I renounced my U.S. citizenship in March of 2001. Then 9/11 happened. And I'd already had problems with U.S. authorities. I nearly got shot dead by a cop in one instance. That man actually killed a Hawaiian a month later, a very dangerous man with a gun and a badge. And I think probably you guys know that Americans are pretty adept, the police, at killing people. So I had other problems, a large bench warrant issued for my arrest for $11,000 for a minor traffic violation. So they could at any time come after me. Then 9/11 happened, and I can honestly say that although I didn't know all the details of what was happening on 9/11, I absolutely knew that this was definitely an inside job. I knew that the agenda was definitely Afghanistan, but also Iraq. And if anyone doubts that, they need only read the Project for American New Century, Project for a New American Century position papers, in which they lay out the agenda, a full spectrum dominance agenda, hitting specific strategic targets around the globe. So all of this I knew, and to me, America at that time in the aftermath of 9/11 literally looked to me like pre-World War II Nazi Germany. All of those stars and stripes flags flying everywhere looked like swastikas to me. And these people who were enraged at a false enemy were being duped once again. Let's get back into history here, false flag operations, but this was the big one. And people were buying into it, and I felt completely, whoa, you know. I already had a problem with the U.S. government. I have a bigger problem now, and I don't know how to keep my mouth shut. So I ended up leaving Hawaii 2 months after 9/11, and I left paradise. You know, I lived on the beach. I had my own business. I was doing what I loved. I had respect in the community. I had my extended Hawaiian family. You know, I left a place that not many people would leave. And I left it to go seek political asylum in Holland. In November, I flew from Hawaii, the sunny Hawaiian beaches, to Holland. And I nearly kissed the ground when I landed there, because I felt I could breathe again. Because I knew at any point that something was going to happen. Maybe they find some, you know, a pound of cocaine in my home, or, you know, maybe they find some explosives. Something was going to happen. So I entered the political asylum procedure. Before I did that, I had really armed myself with understanding of international law. I also came to understand refugee law and asylum law, and I realized I was a legitimate refugee. And I entered the political asylum procedure despite the best attempts of the Dutch government to try and get me out of that procedure. You can imagine 2 months after 9/11, the Dutch government, being very cozy with the United States, did not want an American refugee at all. I actually ended up catching them committing a fraud. And because I caught them dead to rights, they were forced to put me in the long procedure, and I could have been in that procedure for years. But that was 2002, and as 2002 went along, you know, we were in Afghanistan, and you could see the build-up to Iraq. And for me, it was just so blatant and so obvious. All the times that I heard George Bush say, oh, we don't want to invade, we don't want war, we want to... Come on. I don't know how many people bought that stuff, but I definitely was not one of them. And I knew all of this was a charade, all of it. And it made me so angry. And part of what made me angry was that I didn't see anyone doing anything really different here. I saw people deluding themselves into thinking that protesting was going to stop this. I knew there was no way that protesting was going to stop this, not on its own. And, you know, as much as I understand and appreciate protesting, I believe that protesting in itself, if that's the only thing that's done, is counterproductive. Because if people can go to a protest and pretend as if they've done their job and that's all there is to it, then we're screwed. That's not going to change things. Those that are in power are sitting up there laughing at us if that's all we're doing. We have to do more than that. There are people who have to put their lives on the line every day just to survive. And as I said earlier, I think maybe we're just a bit too comfortable. It's part of the good thing about not having money. You know, what do I have to lose? I don't have a bunch of money. I don't have a home. I don't have a bunch of property, so I don't have much to lose. You know, all I have is my honor and my integrity and my conscience. And, you know, no one can take that from me. I don't care what happens. So I saw this whole thing happening, and I realized that the invasion of Iraq was coming. As an ex-Marine who served in the first Gulf War, I felt an extra responsibility, having participated in that first slaughter. So what I did was, and this is a really, really important lesson for anyone who wants to try and make things happen in this world. This is how I managed to get what became a very, very significant and international in scope direct action. I wrote a call to action. I sat down and I wrote the best call to action I could, as concise and as compelling as I possibly could. At that time, indie media was sort of the biggest independent media outlet. And you have indie media, San Francisco, Seattle, you know, New York, London, all over the place. And then you have the main indie media. I took that call to action and I posted it on every single one. It took me hours and hours, and I posted it on every single one. And whatever free press release services, anything like that, sat there on the internet, posted it. Eventually, because it was a compelling idea, I mean, if it had been crap, no one would have paid any attention, but it was a compelling idea. And the argument was that the invasion was going to take place. It was pre-planned years ago. Protests aren't going to stop it. If we want to stop it, we have to make it politically untenable. And the only way that I reckoned we could do that was by getting a mass migration to Iraq with Western citizens primarily. Western citizens who would deploy to sites that are protected by the Geneva Conventions, i.e. Food storage sites, water treatment facilities, power plants, places that when you hit will hurt the civilian population. It's not the military that'll be hurt by that stuff, it's the civilians that'll be hurt, women and children. And that's why it's a war crime, and that's why the Fourth Geneva Convention prohibits this. But the fact is that in war, we hit these places all the time. We did in the first Gulf War. In fact, all of the sites that we had human shields had been hit in the first Gulf War, and most of them had not been fully repaired because of the sanctions, which killed probably another 1 million and 1.5 million people. So the argument was that if we got significant numbers and we deployed to these sites, we would create a circumstance which would be terribly problematic for the American government. If they invaded, and we had 10,000 was the argument I made, 10,000 people out of 1 billion in the West. If we had 10,000 people deployed at sites that are absolutely undeniably supposed to be protected by the Fourth Geneva Convention, what would happen is if the United States invaded, it would hit these targets. It would have to hit these targets. If it hit those targets, then you would find white Western body parts mixed with Iraqi body parts, and that would be a problem. Because the fact is, we still live in a world in which Western life is not valued the same way that non-Western life is valued. Why do we know Rachel Corrie's name or Tom Herndell's name? Beautiful people, and I met Tom Herndell myself. Beautiful people, but the fact is, because they're white and they come from the West, their lives are counted much more differently. We know about their story, we know about their family, yet Iraqis and Palestinians and Afghanis and other dark-skinned people, when they die, we don't hear anything about them. Their lives are seemingly worthless in terms of the way we value life in the public realm. So we needed to get Western life there. Now, as it turns out, it didn't achieve the goal of obviously stopping the invasion, but it did achieve something fairly substantial. The big mistake I made with it was that I did not have a core group of people whom I could trust and whom trusted me, and I had to take people at face value. People who came supposedly with goodwill were infiltrators. They subverted it from the inside, and that's another lesson I would give to anybody who's serious about direct action. You've definitely got to be aware of the outside forces and what you're opposing, but it's the inside that will destroy you. If you don't take care of that, if you don't have solid people around you, you will get destroyed from the inside, and that's exactly what happened. And at the end of the day, although there were probably about 500 human shields in Iraq at the peak, you know, I never had the favor of Saddam Hussein. I said publicly on many programs that, you know, Saddam Hussein was a murderer and a tyrant. That's generally not the way that you lead up to going to Iraq. I don't know anybody who actually said such things before actually going to Saddam Hussein's controlled Iraq. But I knew if I didn't say those things, the argument would be that we were nothing more than pawns of Saddam Hussein. So I had to say them. And therefore I didn't get the support from the dictator. I didn't get the handshake like Donald Rumsfeld. I didn't get any of that stuff. And I had people on the inside subverting it, so it really lost a lot of its power. But despite that, there were 100 human shields in Iraq when shock and awe began. They were deployed at 6 different sites in Baghdad, 2 water treatment facilities, 2 power plants, a food storage site, and a communication site. All of those sites had been bombed during the first Gulf War. Throughout shock and awe, not one of those sites was hit, not one. Now that didn't make the news here, but what it meant to the people in Baghdad was that they had power and they had water. Now if you're a mother and you have a child and you're in the dark and you don't have water, that's a problem, and bombs are dropping all over the place. So even though we did not achieve the primary goal of ending that invasion, we invariably did save life, and we did at least provide some cover for the people of Baghdad for some period of time. Not nearly enough for me, but I think it's an example of what we can do if we're really serious, and it does mean that some of us have to put our lives on the line, but we can do a whole lot more than we've done thus far. And I'm really yearning for the day where we realize our full power and do what we're capable of, which we're getting closer to the flotilla. I was on the first Free Gaza boats. Moving on, I got involved in Palestine right after Iraq. After I knew, we lost our opportunity, I knew Iraq was going to be an absolute disaster. Here we are, 1.5 million dead Iraqis, millions of orphans, millions of refugees, country completely destroyed. We failed there, and I got into the issue of Palestine. Now, my reason for getting involved in Palestine is that I see it very simply. This conflict is the biggest problem in our world. It's not an Israeli-Palestinian conflict. This is my problem. It's your problem. By virtue of the hundreds of nuclear weapons that Israel has, this is everyone's problem. And so eventually I got involved in that, and that led up with a few things in between to the first Free Gaza mission. I don't know how many, most of you know about the first Free Gaza mission that happened in 2008. Well, I was fortunate enough to be on that first one. And, we had 2 boats, 46 passengers, and we managed to sail into Gaza. This was an amazing experience, one of the best moments of my life, without question. It was like winning the Super Bowl or the World Cup, but better. On that day, tens of thousands of Palestinians greeted us in Gaza, and it was just a moment of respite, a moment of joy in an otherwise desperate situation. I can't express enough how it feels to be able to connect with people on that kind of level and show them that there are people out of the 6.5 billion of us that care that much. And to be able to experience that moment is one of the most enriching moments of my life. Right after we got to Gaza, I initiated with Lauren Booth something called Aloha Palestine. And Aloha Palestine is set up effectively to conduct trade. There's a lot of focus on aid, but we're focused on trade. And I think that's actually the cue. I think if we could put on the video, there's about a
It'll take me a minute, but okay.
13-minute video. Actually, I was not even going to go on the flotilla. I have been concentrating on Aloha Palestine for the better part of the last 2 years. And it's a pretty big learning curve. This isn't just getting a boat and, having some courage and sailing to Gaza. There's international trade involved, there's treaties, there's maritime law, corporate law, trade law. There's a lot of information. I've never set up an international shipping company before, so not having the kind of money and resources to pay the people that would generally set up such an entity, I had to learn myself, and that's what I was doing. I was not planning on going on the flotilla because I was too busy with Aloha Palestine, but I realized about 3 weeks actually before the flotilla was going, I realized, I've got to go. It's not easy to get into Gaza, and I thought for sure that the flotilla was going to get in. I saw the Turkish getting involved, large ships, hundreds of people. This was a much bigger scale than the Free Gaza mission, in which 46 of us on 2 small boats managed to sail in. I thought for sure, absolutely, it's getting in, I've got to go. So about 3 weeks before the departure, I ended up contacting a friend of mine who I knew was going on the Turkish ship, and I said, hey, ask if I can go, please. And luckily for me, the person they had vetting people in the UK knew of me and basically said, this brother's good. So I was able to get on the ship. Most of the people had to raise large amounts of money and stuff like that to get on the ship. So I left, and I really genuinely believed that we were going to make it. And the attitude on the ships was fantastic, you know. I mean, this was a great group of people who really care and put themselves in a position to do this very monumental, historic thing. And so I set off to Istanbul, and I ended up boarding the ship like most people in Antalya, and we headed out, and it was supposed to be 9 ships initially. They whittled down to 6. There were problems with 3 of them. 1 was delayed, and we set off. And all the way up to the morning of the attack, I had one brother in particular coming up to me and saying, they're going to attack. Don't worry about it. They're not going to attack. Don't worry about it. And I really was saying that all the way up. And then, you know, moments before the attack, I didn't believe it. And then lo and behold, at 3:40 in the morning, here come the Israelis. And they came up with about 10 to 12 Zodiacs with commandos on both sides of the aft portion of the ship. They immediately started firing percussion grenades, smoke bombs, tear gas, firing paintball rounds and live rounds. That's the art of lying. You know, you tell a little bit of truth and then you omit the part that's not convenient. Yeah, they use paintball rounds, and they use snipers with sniper rifles as well. So the first person that was killed within the first 5 minutes, I'd say. And it was before the commandos had boarded. This was the photographer, father of 2, got a gun bullet wound right here. At a certain point, at the very beginning, I was running around the ship, and I saw him lying down, and I didn't see the bullet, the entry wound. And I got down and I started to take his pulse, and someone pointed to his forehead, and I saw the bullet hole, and realized, well, he's obviously no more. And so right away we knew that this was deadly. This was not an invitation to tea. This was going to be a problem. And then the helicopters came overhead, and I saw the commandos doing what I did in the Marine Corps, fast roping down. A lot of people get this wrong. They think they're abseiling or rappelling. They weren't doing that. They were fast roping. You don't attach to the rope, and you come down very quick, and you're immediately off the rope when you hit the bottom. Once I saw that, I realized, wow, there's a big problem up there. I was actually at the back portion of the ship. Those of us who had volunteered to defend the ship were given certain areas of responsibility, put in 6-person teams, and I was at the back. I was second in charge, I guess because of my military experience, and the Turkish man in charge, I told him, look, I'm going up there, and he said, fine. So I went up there, and I don't know, it's just the way it happens. You know, you couldn't script it. It just happened the way it did. When I went up to the second deck, actually, which is the deck below the top deck, one of the commandos, and you can see it on the footage, gets pushed over the top deck and falls down onto the second deck where I was. And literally, he fell about 3 feet in front of me. And the first thing I saw in that commando was that 9mm pistol. And immediately, I descended upon him and went for that pistol, unstrapped it, pulled it off of him, and another brother was there, and immediately he was taken inside, totally disarmed, completely at our mercy. I literally did not know what to do with that weapon. I didn't want to throw it into the sea because I thought, you know, this is evidence. And if there's ever a trial, you know, this is going to be used as evidence. So I literally ran around that ship for at least 5 minutes with the pistol in my hand like this. You know, cameras came up at certain points. I said they're using lethal force. They're firing real bullets. And I reckon the only reason why I'm alive is one of 2 things. One, they had direct orders not to kill white people, which is distinctly possible. Or I'm an extremely lucky person, extremely lucky, because they had snipers on helicopters with laser-guided sniper rifles. And in fact, the first man who was hit right here, he was hit with one of those rifles. Very accurate, very, very accurate. So I ran from the top back down to the back, up to the other side, back, looking for someone to hand the weapon to, one of the leaders. Where are we going to, you know, keep it as evidence? I went up to the bridge at a certain point and asked the captain, are we keeping any of the weapons? He said, get that thing out of here. So I left the bridge, and eventually I decided that, oh, okay, well, take the bullets out. So I ejected all the bullets. They were real bullets. I then handed over the bullets to one of the brothers inside the ship, and then I hid the weapon. Then I went back outside again, and the same thing happened on the other side of the ship. Another commando fell from the sky right in front of me, And this one had an assault rifle, a submachine gun. And he was much more alert than the first one. He was struggling. He was fighting for dear life. He was trying to use the weapon, and I immediately grabbed onto his hands and started to pry his hands away while one of the other brothers started to grab the weapon. And between the two of us, I got his hands off the assault rifle, and he unslinged it and took the assault rifle away from him. That commando was then totally disarmed and taken inside the ship as well. The brother ended up throwing it into the sea, he told me later, the assault rifle, which wouldn't have mattered anyway because the Israelis took all the evidence. But those were the two commandos that I was involved in disarming. Now, during this whole period, I had seen at least another dead body before the second one, and the bodies were piling up. I mean, Kevin knows that. There was blood everywhere. Those that didn't die had gunshot wounds, many of them very serious. This was a combat situation, except we didn't have combat weapons. Of course, I had a 9mm pistol in my hands, and had I chosen to, I could have easily ended the life of that commando right then and there. It would have been as simple as take that 9mm pistol off of safe, and it would have been over for him. Obviously, that was not our intention, but the point is we could have done that. Now, those three commandos were taken inside. People were dying. Blood is everywhere. Injuries, all this sorts of stuff. One woman had her husband die in her arms. Can you imagine? You know, right there in your arms, bleeding to death. And in that context, we had three of their commandos totally at our mercy. And those commandos, big as they were when they came on with those weapons, looked like little frightened children. All that bravado and everything dissipated completely away. No longer were they the big men acting with honor. They were little frightened children. And they saw in us themselves, and therefore they thought we would do to them what they were doing to us. They thought they were going to die that day. I can assure you, you saw it in their faces. And, you know, we had one man on board who lost his entire family in Lebanon, 2006. Came home, house totally destroyed, 4 children and his wife gone. Gone like that. So, I mean, you can imagine how someone like that feels, seeing the same criminal who killed your family, 3 of them right there. There were people who were angry, there's no question of that. But at the end of the day, what did we do? We gave them medical attention, and eventually we took them out to the bow of the ship and released them up there. That's what we did to them. You might think that the Israelis might have given us some credit for that, but no, it didn't amount to anything. Those commandos, 2 of them jumped in the water right away. The other one was a little worse for wear, so he didn't have the gumption to jump in the water, and eventually the commandos came and got him. You hear in the reports, the Israelis have said that we use those weapons against them. They're implying me to a great extent because I have made it very clear that I had one of their weapons in my possession. And, you know, I can tell you right now, again, if I wanted to use the weapon, if I wanted to actually use the weapon, it wouldn't have been a problem at all. Not a problem. I mean, it really, anybody could have done it. If you know how to squeeze a trigger, it would have been over. So we did not fire those weapons. We had the opportunity to use those weapons. We did not use those weapons. It's just a bald-faced lie. And of course, the Israelis have provided no evidence at all. It's just their word, which is worth nothing. The treatment, I don't know, have you given a presentation? You must have given presentations on this. I mean, the treatment was disgusting. I mean, really disgusting. Lie after lie after lie. We were denied water. We were denied food. An elderly man who pleaded to be able to use the toilet was, you know, told to piss off over and over, and eventually he had to piss in his pants, literally. An elderly man who had his doctor with him, separated from his doctor, and he was pushed around. Muslims who had beards, especially younger ones, they were not treated the same way as, you know, the white folk and whatnot. You know, they got a little extra kick and a punch in the knee and all that kind of stuff. It was a horrendous situation. Many of the people that died because from the transition of ending the resistance, which the word came down from the captain after about a half hour later of releasing the commandos, the captain ordered us to stop resisting. He said the bridge had been taken over. While the bridge was being taken over, I spoke to the captain later. He told me actually what happened was the commandos stormed into the bridge. The chief engineer had his wife on board, and they had their 1-year-old baby. Their 1-year-old baby was with mom up in the bridge. And when the commandos came in, they pointed the gun at the captain and said, "Stop the ship," and he refused. One of the commandos then took the gun and pointed it at the baby, directly at the baby, and said, "Stop the ship." And at that point, the captain did follow the order. And eventually, we did. We stopped resisting. I got into the inside of the ship. I helped carry one of the dead men as well. And it was horrendous. It was an amazing situation. And we all surrendered one by one, hands on the head, walked out to the Israelis. Some of us got a little extra treatment than others, myself included. And we were handcuffed and put on the outer decks. And many of us were on the top deck, exposed to the glaring hot Mediterranean sun for 24 hours before reaching Ashdod port. Once we got there, it was just more of the same. What really strikes me, though, about the Israelis is the coolness with which they lie. It's just built into the fabric of their being. Every single one of them we dealt with practically was just so fully capable of lying at every turn, whether it's, you'll be able to use the toilet in 5 minutes, or you'll be able to call your family tomorrow, or you'll get reunited with your personal possessions at the airport. One thing after another, none of it was true, and it just was par for the course. It's what you do. You lie to them. And this really does beg the question. I'm still waiting. I have not actually been officially called anti-Semitic at this point, and it'll be laughable anyway, since my wife is Semitic and my baby's Semitic, but nonetheless, I think maybe the only reason why it isn't happened yet is because verifiably we can really establish these facts. And the way that we were treated makes you really have to question whether or not there is this large element within the psyche of the Israelis that they are really genuinely God's chosen ones, and everyone else is effectively subhuman, or at least less than them. That's the way they treated us, and compared to the way the Palestinians are treated, it was, like a day at the Ritz, quite frankly. And this is really deeply embedded in the psyche, and you have to actually put effort into not hating people who act like this. And I don't hate them, but you really do have to put effort into not hating them for the way that they act. We went to the jails, and myself and another crazy Irishman, I claim my Irish side anyway, refused to go. We refused to go. We said, absolutely not, we're not signing anything. A lot of people didn't sign things, but we definitely didn't sign anything, and we wanted to go to court, at least to get it on the record, in writing, on the record. And we were the last two in the jail. Literally, everybody had left, and I said to my friend Fiagra, boy, this is going to be fun. And two of us in a whole jail, no one else there. Everyone else had gone out. As it turns out, they just carted everyone out to the buses, and they sat in the hot sun in the buses for a couple hours. And then when everybody was loaded up, they just took us out at the end while we laid in the cell, and they just lied to us. They said, fine, you'll get to see a judge and all that. They didn't mean it. They were just going to take us last, that's all. And finally, we got taken to Ben Gurion Airport. And when we got to Ben Gurion, it was amazing. I don't know if you noticed this too, Kevin, but the attitude actually in the jail was similar. But when we got to the airport, there was this one Israeli who you could tell was definitely in charge, absolutely in charge. And he had all these kind of special police that were there. And he was in civilian clothes. They were all uniformed. And you could tell that this guy had been given the order, no problems. Just get them out of here. This was really fascinating to watch this situation, because you had this guy who was ordered from the top, I'm sure, no problems. And then you had these police, who hated us. And I had my friend Fiacra, he's a crazy, lovely guy, crazy. I'm not antagonistic, believe it or not, when I'm in the company of authority figures, whatever you want to call them. If you treat me with respect, I will act respectfully back to you. As happened today with the Canadian officials, they were respectful, I'm respectful back. But if you're not respectful, then I'm not going to be respectful back. And I don't even know why I've managed to survive as long as I have, because I've been in situations like this where people with guns and badges act like bullies. And it just has a reverse effect on me. I despise bullies more than anything. I really despise bullies. Thank you. And one of the things they would do from the moment that we surrendered all the way up to Ben Gurion Airport, especially on the ship, they'll be standing there with a gun, holding a gun like this, and here you are, and he's just holding a gun like this, You know,
Play the part here.
yeah, handcuffed. And you know, it's a little unnerving when you've got an Israeli commando who's got a gun pointed at you, oftentimes at your head, just sitting there. And this is not an accident, you know, this is just part of the mind games and trying to screw with you and establish their dominance and all this kind of stuff. The other thing they'd do is they look at you. They'd come and they'd look you right in the eye, and they'd look at you like you're the biggest piece of shit ever. And you know, the whole point is then to get you to look down and be submissive, and it has the reverse effect on me. When someone does that, I look right back at them like, you the piece of shit, you know that? And they want to kill you. They want to kill you. And so when we got to the airport, there were about maybe 20 or 30 of us, mostly Turks, and myself and the other Irish brother, Fiacre, and the captain. Funny enough, because we were the last two to get out of the jail, ended up getting put in a transport bus with a captain, which was fantastic. So I get to sit next to the captain and finally talk to him, which I really wanted to. And he told me a bunch of details that I didn't know, such as we were 74 miles out to sea. We were never actually heading into Gaza. We were running parallel to the coastline, never actually going towards Gaza. And we, the three of us, established we would not separate and that we would refuse to go. So we got to the airport, and we've got this situation with the guy in charge and these police who hate us. And my Irish friend is just antagonizing them left, right, and center. He was just being the biggest pain in the butt ever. And you could just see these police just really just wanting to kill. And eventually, at one point, they had this American, Paul LaRudy, who was responsible for Free Gaza to a large degree, the first one. And he had jumped, he's crazy as well, he jumped off the boat during the attack into the water, into the Mediterranean, and whenever they picked him up, they beat him up. He had a black eye, he had bruises on his arm and all this stuff. You could see that he had already been beaten up. He was cuffed, and they told him, you know, something, and he sat down on the ground, and they were obviously wanting to take him somewhere he didn't want to go, and they started to pick him up, and he's screaming in pain, and we all got up, and we started shouting, protesting against the treatment of this brother. And then the police came up to us, and we're shouting, and they're coming up, and they're just looking for an excuse anyway. And bam, it just something happened, and one of them hit me over the head with a baton, and it hit me in the head, made about an 1.5 inch gash, and face wounds just bleed, man. I mean, rule number one for public relations: if you really want to keep on the good side in the public relations camp, then don't hit someone over the head like that, because the blood just goes everywhere. And it didn't do anything to me except just piss me off. And after I got hit, I just screamed all sorts of expletives and what a coward you are and all this kind of stuff. So they got me in a chokehold and started kicking and punching me. One of the Turkish brothers actually had his arm broken. Other people were beat up, but I looked the worst. I had blood everywhere. And the one who got me in a chokehold, this was the only time during the whole thing that I actually really thought this might be it. Because these guys really hated me at this point, and the one who was choking me totally choked me. I could not breathe at all. And I used to be a free diver and could hold my breath up to 4 minutes some time ago. But anyway, I know about breath holding, and I was getting close to the point of blacking out, and a few seconds before I knew I was going to black out, I went limp, and he did let go. But I was thinking in that period of time, however long it was, like, wow, I hope the guy who's in charge gets over here really quick, because I don't know if this guy's going to let go. And, thankfully he did. But what ended up happening was everybody ended up getting put on the planes. And because I was all bloodied up, I think they said, well, we probably shouldn't send him on the plane right now, and put him over there. So I went to a detention cell at Ben Gurion Airport, and everybody flew off. As far as I know, I was certainly one of the very last to be there, aside from maybe some of the injured people who were in hospital. And while I was there, I was attacked one more time. I actually cleaned my face. After a day, I cleaned my face. I refused any medical attention, all this kind of stuff. And then I cleaned my face. But then while I was there, the night before I was deported, I was attacked again and had blood all over me again. So I refused. At that point, I said, well, fine. Then I'm going to keep that blood. Since you've got my laptop, you've got my cameras, you've got my clothes, you've got my cell phone, you've got everything. All I have is my bloody face and my bloody clothes, so I'm going to keep it just the way it is. And eventually, and this is all part of the game. This is the public relations game here. I can tell you, when I flew out of Israel, I was in first class, Turkish Airlines, first class, first one on that plane, sitting in first class, blood all over me, everywhere. I mean, just, you've never seen anything like it, I can assure you. And all these people are coming on the plane, and I'm sitting there, and I'm really feeling kind of stupid about this. Like, you know, why doesn't this guy go wash his face, for Christ's sake? And the reason why is simple. You know, look, this is what they did to me. We don't really have proof of anything. They've stolen all the proof. They have everything. The only thing I have is this. So, you know, I flew into Turkey that way, and some of you probably have seen pictures of that, but that's why I did it. You know, really, you have to make the most of every opportunity you get, no matter how silly it seems. And I really, you know, it was hard for me, but it helped make a difference. It helped establish the kind of treatment that we got, and so that was how the whole thing transpired for me. Now, 2 days after I was released, despite the fact that I did everything that I could to stay in jail, I've told you earlier, the Israelis then list me as a terrorist. Now, this is something now for the rest of my life. If I were Arab, you know, they send out Mossad hit teams for people they call terrorists. If, you know, that's just a reality. So for the rest of my life, you know, the fact is, I might have an accident somewhere. I tell you right now, if ever it's reported that I committed suicide, bullshit. I will never commit suicide. So you know for a fact, if I have an accident, generally I've come to believe that accidents aren't so much accidents. So I'm committed. Absolutely. There's no turning back now. There's no, well, let's just kind of keep it quiet and go retire over there in Hawaii or something. No. For the rest of my life, the Israelis will see me as an irritation, as an embarrassment to them, because we did take their best. We did disarm them with no weapons, and we did let them go, and I'll keep repeating it as long as people are listening. And the fact is that this regime, this Israeli regime, working with America is clearly the most dangerous thing going on this planet right now. And we can try all we want to bury our head in the sands, but, you know, it looks like probably most of you in this audience are parents. You know, you have children. It's our children who are going to inherit this world, and I don't really think they have much going for them at this particular stage right now. You know, I've been to Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I don't know if anyone's been there or ever met survivors, but I've met survivors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and the way that they describe what happened is incomprehensible, I think, for most people. Literally, hell on earth. And we have been flirting with this for decades now. And if we look at the situation, the Raber sattling going on with Iran, can you imagine? I mean, if you wanted, think about it this way, if you wanted to start a third world war, I think the best thing you could do would be attack Iran, really. And that's what our leaders are going to do. I reckon the only reason why the attack, I believe absolutely the attack on Iran was planned previously. It should have happened by now. And the only reason why it hasn't happened, in my opinion, is that enough of us know, and they're doubting whether they have all the pieces in place to be able to cover this, to be able to cover yet another war of aggression based on lies.
Who's they?
Who's they?
Who's they?
Well, the U.S. government is the facade, is the public face, and the Israeli government also is the public face. But you asked the question, I'll give you a straight answer.
I want an answer of who's behind this, the actual names.
Yeah. If you want to know, and this is absolutely part of what we need to face. I don't believe for a second that Barack Obama or George Bush or any of these presidents make any real decisions. They're mouthpieces. They're puppets. All of them. The whole lot. I don't care who it is. And
Rothschild dynasty, does that ring a bell?
there's no question at all that the Rothschilds family and other banking families in particular, well, let's put it this way. This is fairly easy. You know, we live in a world where finances mean everything. I mean, if you don't have any money, you know, you got problems. And can you imagine, I mean, the Federal Reserve and the central banks, if you could print all the money that you wanted, that means you can buy anyone who can be bought. And that's the world we live in, because anyone who can be bought is who gets put in these positions of power. Anyone who cannot be bought, people with honor, aren't in these positions of power, because the system is rigged that way. So every corporation, every government, all the mass media, all these editors, all of them, they're prostitutes as far as I'm concerned. I have more respect for the prostitute who sells her body than I do the prostitutes. We do. I mean, this is part of the problem, isn't it? Because it's false to think that, okay, if we take care of Zionism, if we take care of Israel, we'll solve the problem. No, that's just an extension of the power. All you're seeing is the extension of the power, and the same thing as the United States. It's just an extension of the power. Those that are actually running the world, they could care less about Judaism, about America. This is for the masses. This is for our consumption. Means nothing to them.
Vatican? There's
definitely, yeah. But anyway, I'm definitely in line with you, brother. I mean, they say this is conspiracy theory. That's fine. You know what? I don't care what the consequences are for saying what I believe to be true and which the evidence supports. I mean, we get into 9/11 as well. I mean, come on. There are people who are buying into a fantasy, and the evidence does not support this. Come on. Any objective way of looking at this does not support what all of these experts, all the mass media, all the governments, all of them are saying. The only man who has any integrity, apparently, is a man named Ahmadinejad, who's actually said at the UN what we all know, those of us who are looking at this. But anyway, not to get off track. We have to take care of this situation between Israel and the United States, with Britain, by the way. That's the real axis of evil, and Britain plays a very important role. We have to address this. I believe that direct action has the capacity, because really what direct action is it's like an acupuncture needle. It really exposes the truth. The truth, in my opinion, without doubt, is the most powerful weapon of all. Anything we can do to expose the truth, we must do. And I don't believe anything can do that more than direct action. If we look at the consequences of the flotilla, we have not succeeded in the ultimate goals. But look at what's happened. Before the flotilla, Egypt, horrendous prostitute of a president over there, Mubarak, bought off with $1 million+, bought off by the American government with $1 billion+. What were they doing? Collaborating 100% in the oppression, in the imprisonment of the Palestinian people in Gaza, building a 40-foot wall below as well as above, and not allowing. That was before. After the flotilla, what happened? Rafah was partially opened. Now, that may not make the news here, but that is a big deal to those that are dying from preventable, treatable, emergency medical situations that are not able to be taken care of in Gaza that can now get out. Can you imagine if that was your father, your mother, your brother, your sister? Even if one life is saved from that, well, that's an achievement. And that's the difference there. The U.S. has talked about, the president said, the blockade is, quote, unsustainable. I never heard such a word before used to describe the blockade. As far as I knew, they supported everything about it. The flotilla compelled that, unsustainable. I mean, it's crap, but it's movement. The UN and the EU were doing nothing of any substance. Now we have the UN doing somewhat of its job, and we have the EU condemning the blockade and calling it illegal. It was the flotilla. And not just the flotilla. I would argue it was the fact that we resisted, that people put it on the line and people died in defense of a people who were being oppressed and violated every single day. Because of that, we forced an issue. And by forcing that issue, we have accelerated the process of the downfall of the Israeli Zionist regime.